How to Train Your Dragon books are based on a real place, a place I used to go to as a child. My dad was a mad keen bird watcher, and so every holiday we would be dropped off, when I was very little, by a local fisherman on a tiny little island off the west coast of Scotland. An island so small that when you stood on the top of it, you could see sea all around you. And as I say, when I was very little, we'd be dropped off by the local fisherman and picked up again 2 weeks later. And there was no phone on the island, no electricity, no houses. So what if somebody broke a leg, is what I used to think. You couldn't phone, for the hospital or anything. And as I got older, we would spend the whole summer holiday on the island. My dad had a house built. We'd spend 6 weeks on the island. And he got a boat so that we could go out and catch fish to eat, because there was no Tesco's. You couldn't go to Tesco's or anything. We had to catch all the food that we ate. And so we were sort of living like people lived in Viking times, in those times. And where we were, which was on the west coast of Scotland, was the first place that the Vikings came to when they invaded Great Britain hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So I used to sit on the top of the island and look out to sea, to where the Vikings first came, and imagine what would it be like if you saw a Viking sail on the horizon? Because of course the Vikings were pirates, and they would come and invade and burgle all your belongings and then sail back to Scandinavia. And so this was the starting point for the How to Train Your Dragon books. I thought, I'm going to write a book about Vikings, and I'm also going to write a book about dragons. I'm going to imagine that that dragons really were real, and that these Vikings had dragons to carry them into battle, and they would be able to train them like dogs or like horses. So the dragons would be wild, but they would train them. And this was my idea for the How to Train Your Dragon books. When I started writing my books about Vikings, even though they were fantasy books, I did lots of research about Vikings, because it makes the story seem more real. If you do a lot of research into something, I always think of it a bit like story writing is a bit like telling a really good lie. The more detail you put into it, the more real it seems. So even though I don't always keep to the facts, I use the facts in order to make the story seem very real. So I did all sorts of research into Vikings that was very interesting, that gave me ideas for stories. Like, for instance, the Vikings used skis to get around. And so I thought that would be fantastic for a ski chase. And so one of the books, I have a ski chase where my hero Hiccup is being chased by Vikings on skis. There's all sorts of interesting facts about Vikings. For instance, they had a swimming race in which they swam in full body armour, and the person who came last was the winner. And I used that as an idea for one of my books. So all these funny, interesting facts about Vikings I then put into the books. Or they had extraordinary names, and I used that to give my own characters extraordinary names, like Dog's Breath the Durbrain, or Big Boobied Bertha, or something like that. But they really did have extraordinary names in Viking times, and that's what gave me the idea for using those names in the books.